whatsoever. Antigone says, make what excuse thou wilt, I go to rear a grave above the brother whom I love. Note the fiery temper of Antigone. She suggests to Ismene, you didn't really love Polynices, or you would be doing what I'm doing and burying the body of Polynices. Ismene says, oh, wretched me, how much I fear for thee. Antigone responds, fear not for me. Thine own fate guide aright. In other words, you ought to fear for yourself. Ismene says, at any rate, disclose this deed to none. Keep it close hidden. I will hide it too. In other words, okay. If you're going to do this, let's just not tell anybody about it. Hopefully we can get away with it. Antigone, you can anticipate this one sounding very much like a character who we recently studied, Prometheus. Yes, Promethean. That is to say, that adjective, don't tell me what to do. Sounding very Promethean, Antigone says, speak out, I bid thee. I want you to tell people, silent, thou wilt be more hateful to me than if thou shouldst tell my deed to all men. Tell everybody, I want everybody to know I did this. Ismene says, fiery is thy mood, of course reminding us very much of Oedipus, although thy deeds might chill the very blood. Antigone says, I know I please the souls I seek to please. That is to say, in the afterlife, right? Ismene says, if thou canst do it, but thy passion craves for things impossible. I would write that line down and go back and give some consideration to it at the end of the play. Thy passion craves for things impossible. You are fighting, like Sisyphus, that uphill battle. Remember, we talked about Sisyphus, who has that huge boulder in Hades that he has to push up a hill, and right about the time he gets to the top, the boulder rolls back down over him and he has to start all over again. Ismene says to Antigone, you are trying to do the impossible, and you are foolish to do it. Antigone says, I'll cease to strive when strength shall fail me. I'm ready to die. Let's point out, Antigone, and this is the brilliance of Sophocles, who knows how to create a character so quickly. We're not that many lines into the play, and already we have an opinion of Antigone. What is she like? She's driven. She's driven. She is Promethean. She is get out of my way. She is, of course, fundamentally everything we would think about maybe a tragic hero, only she's female. She's a woman. And for the Greeks already, this is quite fascinating, right? Now, to finish, Ismene will say, even from the first, it's not meet to seek what may not be. In other words, you got to be rational. You got to be reasonable. This is dumb. How can you do this? Is just going to end in you getting jacked and all kinds of terrible things happening. Put it in your notes. Ismene. We got several prophets, by the way, in this play. We'll meet the great prophet Tiresias here in a bit. But Ismene is a prophetess as well, and she says it. There's ripple effects to your actions. There are consequences to your actions. Things are going to go bad for you and for us. I can feel it. Antigone says, if thou speak thus, my hatred wilt thou gain. I will hate you if you keep talking, and rightly will be hated of the dead. Leave me in my ill counsel to endure this dreadful doom. I shall not suffer aught so evil as a death dishonorable. She says, I'd rather die doing it the right way than die dishonorably. Ismene will finish, go then, if thou wilt, of this be sure, wild as thou art, thy friends must love thee still. And I think that's an important line, because Sophocles recognizes with his Greek audience, and we'll have more to say about this at the end of this lecture. Sophocles understands what he's doing with his Greek audience. He is setting up a very difficult dilemma for his Greek audience. Do you side with Antigone, a woman who says out loud, I will break the state law. I will go against the will of the king, Creon. Well, if you side as a viewer of this play, as a Greek viewer, if you side with Antigone, then you are siding with a person who betrays country. That's not a patriot. That's not a patriotic act. To that degree, Sophocles has put his audience members of the Greeks in a very nasty dilemma. So Ismene's line is an important one. Antigone is kind of wild and crazy, but you can't help but love her. The word love here, by the way, will mean respect for Greek audiences. You got to respect her. In other words, Greek audiences understand well the dilemma of Antigone. The question, and I think this is why Aristotle doesn't like this play as much as he likes Oedipus Rex, the question is a little bit too murky and confusing. And Aristotle was a guy that liked to have very clean lines. This play, and I think this is why it's such a popular play today, there are no clean lines in this play. There's all kinds of shades of gray, as we'll get into as we start to talk about it. Well, the chorus comes on to basically give us some backstory, tells us about the two brothers killing each other. We think immediately, don't we, of the biblical story of Cain and Abel, and any number of other stories that come to mind of brothers against brothers, where both of the brothers end up dead. We meet Creon for the first time, and when he comes on stage, he is regal in every way. Now, sometimes today, you can read summaries of this play, and adjectives like haughty and conceited and prideful will be associated with Creon. That, I believe, is a more modern reading of the King Creon. Creon has had to deal with some terrible stuff in Thebes. First, you had his sister Jacusta, who married her own son and had 4 children, and then ended up hanging herself, and Oedipus ended up having to leave the city. The city has been accursed ever since Creon came to the throne. And then you've got this whole thing between Oedipus' 2 sons, where Sophocles and Polynices are going at each other. And finally, both of them are dead. And finally, Creon has decided, I know how I have to deal with this. I cannot have my own subjects disobeying the law. I have to keep law and order. Let's write that one down, because that sits behind everything Creon's doing. I think it's a misreading of Creon early on to say that he's simply out to jack Antigone. I don't think so. I think what he's out to do is to prove I'm the one in charge, because he has to be the one in charge. He says it this way: hard it is to learn what each man is. The key word here is learn. In heart and mind and judgment, till one gains experience in the exercise of power. He says, I'm kind of new at this still, but I have made a law. He's talking to the chorus, and the law is simple. No burial of the body of Polynices. We're going to make him a show. We're going to prove to everybody you don't want to go against the state. That is an act of, not of patriotism, but of betrayal. And in that regards, I'm not going to support any kind of burial of Polynices, right? And me, whoe'er is called to guide a state, that's my job, and does not catch at counsels wise and good, but holds his peace through any fear of man. I deem him basest of all men that are, of all that have ever been, and whoever is worthier than his country counts his friend. I utterly despise him. Important lines. Nothing, Creon says, is more important to me than taking care of my people, of the state, of Thebes. In other words, when we see Creon for the first time, he's very clear in what he believes has been given to him as his responsibility. My job is to take care of the state. In other words, I do not hold my friends or my relations higher than the will of the state, the good of the state. Of course, let's say this out loud. And we're going to get to it here in a little bit again, right? The challenges for Creon. But basically, he's going to say, if I make a law, and that law, if it's broken, has a punishment, I have to give the punishment regardless of who has broken the law, even if it's one of my friends or even if it's one of my family members. In other words, the state is more important than the individual friend or even family members. Rule must somehow make the state. He says, by these rules and such as these will I maintain the state, and now I come with edict close allied to those in spirit for my subjects all concerning those 2 sons of Oedipus. Sophocles will receive proper burial, Polynices will not. So now we have set up in this speech of Creon then the key conflict. It's very simple. You've got a situation where he's made the rule, and the minute he's made the rule, he's going to tell you what happens if you break the rule. And if you break the rule, then of course he's got to make a decision about whether he's going to hold the rule breaker accountable. Now it's significant, and go back to our lectures on Plato's Republic, and more particularly those early comments, and these are again all online at learnstrong.net, where we talk about the idea of the ideal state. And you'll remember that Socrates said that the thing that makes a group of people most ideal is if there is harmony. How do you keep harmony? You got to have rules, and those rules have to be kept. We cannot have people taking the law into our own hand. Vigilante activities will only lead to anarchy, a word that will get actually translated in this text. Anarchy. In other words, got to have rules if you're going to have a state. The guard then will show up, who's been guarding the body of Polynices, and he's got bad news. The body of Polynices has been buried. Now, don't think burial as in under the ground burial. What we mean here is ceremonial burial. There's been some dust that has been scattered on the body and some libations that have been poured over the body. Creon is outraged. Let's say three things really quickly about Creon and the chorus. Both Creon and the chorus and the guard assume that it's a man who has done this. Surely it's a man. They don't even consider the possibility that it could be a woman, like, for example, Antigone. Don't even consider it. Number two, immediately when Creon hears this, he assumes that it has something to do with a payoff. Creon is very flat-footed in his thinking, and he thinks that the only reason why anyone would ever bury the body of Polynices is because somebody paid him to do it. He cannot think beyond that kind of thinking. It will get him in some trouble, obviously. It is a character flaw, right? And we will see this as well when he has his conversation with Tiresias a little bit later, that for him, power is always, it seems to be about somehow money. And money is always, it seems to him, to be about power. Well, we've already met a character in Antigone who could care less about money. She's not burying the body of Polynices because of power and money. She's burying the body of Polynices because she thinks it's the right thing to do. Creon says it simply to the guard. Either you find out who did this, or I'm going to assume that you are a guilty party. Somebody paid you to allow this to happen, and I'm going to kill you. And the guard will leave. The chorus will ask some interesting questions in their choral episode. Was the burial, they suggest maybe, the burial of Polynices the will of the gods? In other words, for the first time, the chorus begins to maybe ask the question, do you think it's the right thing to have this law and to make Polynices as kind of like a showcase of what happens if you go against the city? Of course, this is a central conflict. What do the gods want? Do the gods want obedience to the gods, or do the gods want obedience to the state? And what happens when those two things come into conflict with each other? Well, Antigone shows up with the guard. The guard basically explains how it's the case that he found Antigone, and now Creon and Antigone will have an exchange. Now, put it in your notes. This is a play of ostensibly two major dialogues. The first one is the face-to-face between Antigone and Creon, because Sophocles is playing a very, very dangerous game in this play, because he's going to put the leader of the country, the leader of the state, the leader of Thebes, Creon, with Antigone on stage, and Antigone's going to give her arguments, and these arguments are going to be very, very dangerous arguments, okay? We will have a second conversation between Creon and his son Haemon, who will also, for us, have a very important role to play in how philosophically, intellectually we read this play. Antigone shows up. The first question is, did you actually do this? And she's like, yeah, I did it. Creon asks, didst thou then dare to disobey these laws? Antigone doesn't back away at all. Creon assumes that Antigone's going to pretend maybe like she didn't do it, or that she didn't know the law, or any of those things. And Antigone says, yes, for it was not Zeus who gave them forth. Zeus didn't give those laws, nor justice dwelling with the gods below, who traced these laws for all the sons of men. Nor did I deem thy edicts strong enough, coming from mortal man, to set at naught the unwritten laws of God that know not change. Very simple. And in fact, we've heard this argument many, many times in the history of political thought. Think about how this one stands behind much of what Martin Luther King Jr. says, for example, in his famous letter from a Birmingham jail. We've given lectures on this elsewhere. The same argument is Antigone's argument. There's two laws. There's the law that you give as a mortal, Creon, and there's the law the gods give. And that one is higher. That one is more important. When it comes to having to decide which law I'm going to obey, I obey the laws of the gods, not your law. Well, it's not going to take Creon very long to point out that, well, that's faulty logic, because the gods will place the king in charge. The king's job is to make sure that we have proper political rule, and that means everybody's got to obey. Everybody's got to obey the rules, right? Antigone continues. She says, the laws that the gods give, they do not change. They are not of today nor yesterday, but live forever. Nor can man assign when first they sprang to being. No one knows when these laws came into being, but we know that they exist. Like you're supposed to show proper reverence to the body of a fallen warrior. Not through fear of any man's resolve was I prepared before the gods to bear the penalty of sinning against these. That I should die, I knew. How should I not? Though my decree hath never spoken. I knew I was going to die. I'm not afraid to die, she's saying to Creon. And before my time, if I should die, I reckon this is a gain. For whoso lives, as I, in many woes, how can it be but death shall bring him gain? In other words, I cannot live in a state that makes laws like this. I'd rather die now. Whoa. Keep reading. And as for me, to bear this doom of thine has nothing painful. I'm not afraid of you. But if I had left my mother's son unburied on his deaths, I should have given them pain. But as things are, pain, I feel none. I don't feel any guilt, in other words. And should I seem to thee to have done a foolish deed, 'tis simply this: I bear the charge of folly from a fool. Whoa! So for the first time, we see Antigone and Creon together, and she says two things. One, you bet I buried the body of Polynices, because that's what the gods say I have to do. You and your silly little laws. Pfft. Point number two, you're a fool. You should have thought this one through before you made the rule. The chorus will inject the maiden's stubborn will of stubborn sire, the offspring shows itself. The chorus goes exactly where Ismene went. Oh, this is just like Oedipus. She's so stubborn. We could say Promethean. Note the difference between the two, right? When we say Promethean, we mean stubbornness in a positive way. The chorus here means stubbornness in a negative way, right? She knows not yet to yield to evils. That is a compelling line for the chorus, and it's an interesting, subtle line. She hasn't yet figured out how to be political, in other words. Sometimes you have to live with things you don't agree with to live in a state. Antigone is going to have none of it. She's like, no, that's absolutely wrong. If something is wrong, it's wrong. And if it's right, it's right. And I don't care whether I'm going to die. Creon will respond, both to the chorus as well as to Antigone. Know then, he says, minds too stiff most often stumble. Now these are compelling. I mean, Sophocles is true genius here, because the dramatic or the onstage irony here is just as powerful as in the play Oedipus Rex, where Oedipus is saying something that the audience understands has a second and even a third meaning. Notice what he says here: minds too stiff most often stumble. He's talking about Antigone. He's talking about Oedipus, and he's saying no flexibility here. They have their way or the highway. Of course, the irony will be at the end of the play we recognize all of these lines are really about the true protagonist of the play, Creon. Keep reading. Minds too stiff most often stumble, and the rigid steel baked in the furnace. We think of Arthur Miller's Crucible, don't we? Baked in the furnace, made exceeding hard, thou seest most often split and broken lie. In other words, he says, Antigone thinks she's going to be able to defeat me with this. I will break her. Of course, the irony of all ironies is we really don't see much of Antigone in this play. Like I say, this is not really a play about Antigone. This is a play about Creon. And certainly Greek audiences would have seen it for sure that way. Now the challenge that is Creon's is, I think, significant. So let's pause for a moment here, and let's just make a couple of observations about Creon's dilemma. Put it in your notes this way: Creon's dilemma. Because if we're not careful, we will often read this play as Creon is the villain of the play, and I think that's an inappropriate reading of this play, and I want to help you to understand why. Let me give you two ideas, two ways of kind of thinking about this. And I might have said this in other lectures on Antigone, but I'm going to go ahead and say it again here. The first one is, think about this. Do you think, I mean, you're a young person who's been raised by a parent, so this is an easy question for you. Do you think it's at all possible, right, that a parent once made a law without really thinking through exactly the implications of that law, right? Because think about this. We were all raised by fundamentally two different kinds of parents. Parent number one, you will be home at 12 midnight, no later, and you come walking in at 12:30, and the parent says, you young man are in trouble. You young lady, I can't believe, don't you do that again. And you go, yeah, not again. You will be in at 12 o'clock next time, 12:45. I can't believe you are in trouble. I think I might have to ground you at some point if you keep this. That's one kind of parent. There's a second kind of parent, some of you are smiling. There's a second kind of parent that some of us know, and it was simply this. The deadline is midnight. You're not here at 10 till midnight. Your stuff's in the front lawn. Go find somebody else to live. Rules are rules. And when you were out, you started looking at your timepiece at around 11. Why? Well, if you were hanging with somebody who had a parent like the first one, they were like, dude, really? I mean, what difference does it make? Come in at 12:30. It's not a big... And you went, no. You don't understand. When my ma says stuff's in the front lawn, when my dad says be home at midnight, that's what she means. No question. And yet, we're familiar as well with the idea. Think about this, and I hope that you can begin to kind of catch a little bit of the dilemma of Creon. Do you think it's at all possible that one time in your life, a parent, a teacher, some adult, challenged you with a rule and a punishment, but didn't realize as the adult the implications of that rule until it was too late? Right? And then to break the rule or the punishment for the adult would seem a certain kind of weakness, right? If you do X,